This episode brought to you by Peter Wood's Museum of the Impossible.
What's a Museum of the Impossible? It's gonna be like Harry Potter meets Ripley's Believe It or Not. It'll be a one-of-a-kind, themed, interactive space where people can experience the impossible. But I need your help. To get the project started, I've set up a Patreon over at museumoftheimpossible.com. If you're able to throw a few bucks my way each month, we can build it together. Thanks for your support, and I can't wait to welcome you into the Museum of the Impossible.
Welcome to the podcast of the impossible. I'm Peter Wood, and I've watched and performed a bunch of magic shows with today's guest. I always love our post-show debriefings, and today you'll get a little peek behind that curtain. So please join me in welcoming back Timothy Carver. I have a bunch of different things that I still are on my to-do list to chat with you about. But one thing that we've talked about a little bit, and I thought it might be fun to explore a little bit here today, is that while I got started in magic young, I didn't really find a magic community in the way of like magic club meetings or regular magic shop hangouts until I was in my late teens, early 20s. Because I would go, the magic shop was like 45 minutes away from our home. And I would pretty much only go when I had money to spend. Like it was after, doing shows for money or birthdays, getting cash or whatever. So I never really got that like hanging out on a Saturday experience. But you did, not only at the magic shop, but also at magic clubs and organizations in the area. Absolutely. So what do you remember how young you were when you were sort of getting into that world?
Early teens.
Okay.
13, 14, 15, that kind of ballpark is when I really started taking magic seriously, studying in a real practiced manner.
Okay.
I had met, Jeff Eline, again, a guest of yours previously, a mentor of mine, good friend. He had taught me kind of beginner techniques and was always game for watching a routine of mine and giving me critiques and advice. Still remember the first time he kind of sat me down and said, "Do you know how to walk out on stage to introduce yourself?"
Interesting.
And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Well, let me see what you would do." And I remember walking through the doorway at the magic shop with a deck of cards in my hand, walking into the room, and Jeff's like, "Nope, no, all wrong. Stop what you're doing."
Nice.
And then he proceeded to give me some of the best advice for a walk-on.
Okay.
And I still use it. I just did a show with him not too long ago, and I'm thinking backstage, I'm like, I'm about to use the advice that he gave me in a show performed alongside him. And it was this really amazing turnabout moment.
Okay.
It was a really great experience to be able to feel and do for him and for me.
Oh wait, did you guys both walk out doing the exact same thing because you used his? Okay, all right. What was his advice?
So his advice on it was one, posture and sort of just confidence and communication.
Okay.
Do not walk on with your hands full. Just make sure that your hands are empty. You have a very good reason. You do not want to be holding a deck of cards with two hands walking on stage. That's such a weird, goblin thing to do.
Yeah, sure.
It just looks bad. And so all of these things, and it's like, okay, let's do this. It was a fantastic show. I had a ton of fun. Jeff killed. He was
awesome.
Great.
Oh, that's great.
But no, magic community and getting into learning from other magicians. I remember the first magic meeting I went to, which was also subsequently the first time I had ever been to the magic shop.
Okay.
They were coincided the same day. I had met Jeff for the first time and sat front row in the theater that was in the back of the shop, in the old shop. And it was, I seem to remember 30 people. This was back when we had just better numbers.
Okay.
It's not as many people anymore, sadly.
Sure.
But they had a sign-up sheet, and everybody who performed chose to perform, and it was a lot of card tricks, and I love card tricks, so I was just enraptured, just so excited to see everything, because there was a lot of stuff that I had never seen before.
Yeah.
And so I remember that meeting with a great deal of fondness. And then I went to the next meeting and saw a lot of the times the same card tricks done by the same people,
Right. Okay.
or in some cases a different trick done worse, done poorly.
Right.
Like, you know, and again, the point of the magic meeting is to work out material and say,
Sure.
I'm working on this, I'm looking for advice.
Yep.
But the number of people who would just say, I learned this last night, and then would do the trick for
Yeah.
an audience of their peers,
Yeah.
and then walk off with not asking for critique, not asking for advice, not trying to make it better, just wanting a chance to perform,
Sure.
and then not taking anything from that experience, confused me
Right.
a lot. I was like, you don't want to know what worked, what didn't,
Right. Right.
what could be improved. And I remember the first time performing was, I think, a couple of meetings later. We're talking, the meetings are like monthly.
Yeah.
So this is almost a year later, somewhere in that ballpark. First time I ever performed a trick seriously. And I'm dressed the way, and again, this was advice that my mentors had given me, Garrett and Jeff. Dress the way you intend to perform professionally, because then you're wearing the same outfit, you'd have the same pocket layout, all this sort of, designation. It's called a dress rehearsal.
Sure.
And I'm wearing a suit in this tiny little room, and I'm very nervous about performing in front of all these people.
Yeah.
And my dad, who was always very supportive, still is, sat next to me and said, "You're sweating profusely."
Oh no. Yeah.
And so I had sweated almost through my entire
Ugh.
suit, just so nervous about this first performance, because
Sure.
I'm doing this in front of everyone.
Yeah.
And it was a Svengali deck routine, because I didn't want to rely completely on my own sleight of hand at that
Okay,
time. This was
sure.
still very young.
Yep.
And I had put together a routine that I'd worked on for what I remember as being like a good 3 months. I'd watched a DVD by Daryl, The Essentials on Trick Cards,
Yeah.
or Essentials of Magic, I think is the DVD series.
Yeah.
And one of them was on the Svengali deck, and I put together all of the best tricks that could go back to back to back without changing the sequence.
Okay.
And it was a huge hit with everybody.
Nice.
From what other magicians had told me, I had fooled several of them because they had assumed that I'd been practicing only sleight of hand, because that's all I ever showed anybody
Right.
in the casual, like, sessioning and things.
That's cool.
And so they had no idea that I'd use a trick deck of cards.
Right. Right.
And so I fooled everybody with speller tricks and any card at any number type things,
Okay.
where they can't be done with sleight of hand that well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because it's a trick deck. And so that went off great. And months later, I still remember, guys coming up and saying, "Man, that deck routine was just so good. You should do
Right.
that more often."
Right.
To this day, I don't remember what I did,
Okay.
but that was a great first experience, if only terrifying and sweaty.
Sure. Well, but it is funny like that the joke is that, like, at a Magic Club meeting, magicians will gasp or applaud at the wrong times.
Definitely.
Because, like, we all know what, not always, in many cases, we know what the person is trying to do.
Right.
And, like, at the moment where they do the secret move and the audience should be oblivious to it, we're like, oh yeah, that was good.
Right.
Or like, oof, you flash that.
Right.
So it is really funny. Like, you would not necessarily have gotten that sort of reaction from the general public, because they just assume that everything you're doing is sleight of hand, so it's a little misguided, but So what are some of, like, what do you get out of going to a Magic Club meeting? Like, what's your goal, or what's your takeaway?
I think back then it was different than it is now.
Okay.
Nowadays it's just to socialize and see my friends and hang out.
Sure.
On rare occasions, it'll be to test something, to work out a new routine or a new material, trying to get that in front of people and get some advice. Problem is, by and large, the members of the Magic meetings are hobbyists, not professional, and of the professionals, they're not doing the same magic I'm doing.
Right.
So they'll be giving advice like, put more jokes in, make it more entertaining, stand up straighter. Valuable information, but I'm trying to do this routine for a certain context, and they're not considering that, or I haven't communicated that. And so by and large, the information doesn't really get applied, because it's like, that's not really what I'm trying to do here.
Yep.
And so I've been very careful to learn who to ask for critique from,
Yeah.
And people that I really trust. I've always trusted your opinion, Jeff, Brian Curry, Garrett Thomas, Ben Earl.
Sure.
These people who have seen me really work out a routine or a slight or a single moment or something.
Yeah.
And give me advice that's actionable and usable.
Yeah.
So most of the time when I go to meetings, it's mostly just to hang out and see other people perform, mainly Jeff.
Yeah.
Watching him perform is always just an absolute joy. He's
Yeah.
so good. He's polished and funny.
Sure.
And even the routines that he's never performed before they're at a certain quality level because he's just done it so often.
Yeah.
I just love seeing that. I just admire it so much.
No, it's great to. I mean, yeah, it is one of the challenges is that I don't know what it's like with other sort of fraternal organizations, and I'll use the term loosely, but hangout clubs with other like-minded people. I do feel like there's a very wide spectrum of reasons that people go to a Magic Club meeting.
Of course.
And that has been one of the challenges for me. I still go and I enjoy, for like all the reasons you've said. And it is not only a social aspect, but also when I am trying out something new, I would rather show it to a group of, my peers. And again, that's a broad spectrum, but
right.
At the same time, there are plenty of guys who do not perform professionally, but still will give me a great note, when I'm trying something out. But it is weird for me to realize that there are folks who will go to the meeting as their once a month performing a magic trick slot.
Yep, definitely.
And they learned a trick to do at the meeting and they did it. And then they don't want to get any critique about it because they may not revisit it again. And I'm reminded of the Albert Goshman quote where a professional magician does the same tricks for different audiences, and an amateur magician does different tricks for the same audience. And that is very true, where like if you learn a couple of tricks and you do it for your family and friends, now what? Like you've sort of burned it. Now you have to go learn something else. But I'm glad that now did you, in terms of age difference, the running joke is that the average age at a Magic Club is deceased.
Right.
What was that culture shock like for you? And I mean, it was your dad came to a bunch of meetings just to make sure it wasn't like grade A creepy, but
definitely a grade of creepy.
right. Yeah. Not actually threatening, but still potentially creepy. Yeah. So yeah, tell me about some of that.
Well, I was again a teenager, and the median age at those meetings is AARP.
Totally.
And all men.
Yep.
All white. And they just, I don't know, it was unsettling initially because I was like, okay, so I'm the only kid here.
Right.
And all of these old guys who, again, I didn't know well, I presumed have been doing this their entire lives and were the best in Maryland.
Oh, right. Okay.
I got to prove myself to these guys.
Yeah. Okay.
That's terrifying.
Sure.
And so eventually I realized, I practiced more times in a day than they practiced all month up until the meeting.
Right.
In a lot of instances,
yeah,
I'm totally cool. I'm totally fine.
Right.
After I realized that, I didn't take it so seriously, and I started trying to have fun with it, and that's what I do now at meetings.
Yeah.
Mess with people, and the guy who taught me that is the only other person in my age range, Jacob Greenwald.
Right.
He's 21, where I'm 24. And so he's the wonder kid of magic in Maryland. He's just such a good magician, so charismatic, very good performer, student of Jeff Eli, no surprise. And I remember the first time I met him, realizing, the other magicians here can also be my age.
Cool. Yep.
He was doing a magic trick for a mutual friend of ours, Nick DeCutis, who's one of the best sleight of hand artists in Maryland, D.C. area, without question.
Yeah.
And I've always looked up to Nick for that exact reason. And then Jacob's doing a trick where he's forcing a card, and Nick goes to take the card and goes through the entire trick and then questions after, did you force this on me? And doesn't
Nice.
even register that Jacob had done the technique because it was that smooth.
Good. Yeah.
And that was my first introduction to Jacob.
Nice.
And so I'm like, oh, so this is my actual competition.
Right.
And
Sure,
so that
sure.
was our first outset
That's great.
meeting, and it was just wild. So I remember um, eventually becoming friends with him. He'd gone to Magic Camp and told me about Magic Camp, and we
Okay.
hung out in the Magic Shop and in Baltimore all the time. We're great friends now.
Sure.
And he's always been one of the first people, again, picking people to critique.
Right.
Been one of the first people who gives me advice or that I request advice for a routine or works out a set with me. It's very, very valuable to have people in your demographic to give
Yeah.
advice like that, because again, the older members of the Magic meetings and stuff, they'll be giving advice that just isn't applicable from a guy, a quarter of their age.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that yeah, again, you want diversity in your feedback. I mean, if it's coming from a bunch of people who are all in one same school of thought, then you're really only getting one perspective, just hearing it from 5 different people.
Exactly.
So yeah, you want to have a variety there. Yeah, and I was also curious. We had talked before about secrets and sort of I mean, we're sitting here in this room. I have my library, and I think that like magicians will probably be the last ones holding on to physical books, when every other sort of profession has moved on. There is something about putting a secret in a book that makes it an interesting, a book is an interesting gatekeeper for that secret, where it's not really a proper lock and key sort of a thing, but at the same time, the amount of effort that you have to expel in finding the book and reading the book and then understanding what the book is trying to say is very different from YouTube.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts sort of on like where secrets in magic are kept, where should they or should they not be, like what in terms of your sort of secrecy and exposure level?
I think I have a bit of a biased experience on this opinion. I'm dyslexic. So
Oh, okay.
To date, I've read only one Magic book cover to cover.
Okay.
And that's a book that was designed specifically with that pediment in mind.
Okay.
Which is a book called Inside Out by Ben Earl. He wrote that book to be completely conversational. It is not the sort of dry textbook format that most Magic books come in, which is here's the presentation script,
Right.
here's the techniques that are required, here's the method in operation, and then that's the trick.
Right.
His entire format for this was here's the story of how I came up with this trick. And in this explanation of a story of the trick, he also mentions, oh, by the way, I just palmed the card here.
Oh, okay.
And so it's this paragraph or this short story of a time he had to run from the police and ended up jumping in a dumpster.
Okay.
And found himself doing a card trick for the person who was already in the dumpster.
Okay.
Because he had to figure out a way out of this situation. Right. That was very unsettling.
Wow.
And so he explains this trick that he was doing inside a dumpster.
Okay.
And then I still perform that trick to this day because you hear that story and you can never forget it.
Oh, I see.
It's a really interesting way to keep these magic tricks in memory because, again, dry textbooks aren't designed to be memorized, aren't mnemonics.
So he's using like a memory peg type, or
essentially,
and
he those are true stories for one.
Okay.
Which is wild.
I wondered why you brought a dumpster to most of your shows.
Right.
But now it's in case you want to do that routine. Like everyone go out to the parking lot. It's
not required, but yeah.
Oh, it's okay. Well, you want to pay respect.
The context.
Yeah.
So I have a unique perspective on magic books and where they keep secrets because I don't have access to a lot of those.
Right.
So what I've done because of that detriment, you might say, is I surround myself with people who read more magic books than I'll ever possess.
Right.
Have access to more magic books than I'll ever possess.
Right.
People like Jeff Eline, people like yourself, my friend Nick or Spruce. He's from Colorado and he's read seemingly every magic book ever.
Right.
And I'll text him and say, I'm looking for a method on this and I think it might be in this book. And he says, well, let me check. And then he finds the exact spot because he has an index of his entire library and can search it on a database.
Wow, that's cool.
And so he's like, yep, it's right here.
Okay.
And then he'll walk me through the method, teach me everything. And it's as if I got all the best key points of reading the whole chapter, reading the whole trick,
Right.
given from a perspective and a patience where I can actually digest the information. Because if I had the book
Right.
in hand and tried to learn it, it would go in one ear out the other.
Right. Right. Okay.
So I've surrounded myself with people specifically who can give me access to this information. But
That's cool.
there are instances where the only solution is to dig down and read the book.
Yeah.
So I do have a magic library, but it's extremely curated for the things that are just really hard for or are really obscure that other magicians haven't ever worked on.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Like if you're able to access that through a proxy,
Right.
then why would you need to have it
The hard
the hard copy and well, hard copy meaning physical, but also hard, like difficult for you
precisely.
to get the info there. Yeah. So where so you did early on you did YouTube video
Almost exclusively for the first 3 years was
Okay.
just YouTube. It was Jarek 120, otherwise known as Disturbed Reality, his
Okay.
YouTube channel. It was 52 Cards, Miss Mag, Jay Sankey.
Okay.
Now I think the best production value on YouTube for magic content is Jeremy Griffith. He's also on Instagram.
Okay.
He has a YouTube channel teaching the fundamentals of sleight of hand
Hmm.
at such a high quality and such a clear, concise format. If I had access to that when I was 10 years old learning this stuff,
Right.
I think I'd be a much, much better magician.
Cool.
And so I always point people in that direction because
Right.
YouTube has such value, and Jeremy is doing it better than anyone right now.
I see. Okay. Well, and actually that brings us to so you teach now.
I do.
Wait, who gave you the right to no? No, I mean I find it fascinating where I guess because you did a deep enough dive early enough and like picked a lane that now I know that you have magic students who are 3 times your age.
Yep.
And so but I think it makes it very clear, like even helping out at a magic shop, when someone comes in and says, I'm looking for a magic trick for my 12-year-old, my follow-up question is always like, well, do they do anything already?
Right.
Because I don't really care. I mean, there's a difference between a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old, but there's no difference between a beginner 12-year-old and a beginner 43-year-old. You've got
Skill
the
level.
abilities to learn. Yeah. And so are you a beginner or not?
Right.
So how did that all come about? Like, how did the teaching?
Initially, it came about through the pandemic.
Okay.
I didn't have another source of income at the time because I was working a day job that vanished overnight,
Sure.
and I had to find some way to pay the rent because I had just signed a 1-year lease a week before losing my job.
Okay.
Bad luck
Yeah.
on that one.
Yeah.
And so I was in scramble mode talking to Garrett because I go to advice from my mentors because,
Yeah.
you speak to people, your mentors, about not just the subject of magic, but we talk about everything. We are good
Cool.
friends. Another very valuable thing is don't just use your mentors as textbooks. You actually have to treat them like people and
Sure.
provide value in a relationship that way.
Right.
But I had asked Garrett, and he was like, you realize you're very good at magic. You could just teach some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are a lot of gray areas and ground rules on teaching magic. You can't teach anything that's published.
Sure.
Nothing that's like produced because that would be stealing from another person.
Right. Right.
Be very careful about that. But when it comes to the open access
Sure.
stuff, techniques that you can easily find on YouTube, but I can teach people how to do that without having them have to have the pains of rebuilding the wheel themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
They don't have to go through as many struggles and distinctions. If I could say, no, just put your finger here and apply pressure there,
Right.
as opposed to what they were going to try and do, I
Yeah.
can save them a lot of time.
The trial and error that they would have to go through without
Absolutely.
having a.
There's a lot of
teacher.
value
Sure.
in that, of course. And I often think I question whether or not that might be the critical time to do, especially when you're young, is literally just trial and error and fail a lot.
Oh, okay.
Because the amount of, what's the kind of problem solving
Okay.
you have to do for that
Right.
teaches you to think like a magician inadvertently when it comes
Okay.
to sleight of hand.
Sure.
you have to take the approach that Garrett brings up all the time is an advanced empathy. You have to think from the audience's perspective of what they'd be seeing if you were on the other side of this.
Okay.
And while doing the move, let's say it's a second deal, you take the card from underneath. You have to be able to see that from their perspective, not from your perspective, which is up and over. You can see everything you're doing because you're at this angle.
Yeah.
And knowing your audience isn't, and what they'd be seeing is a very, very important tool. And those sorts of problem-solving things come out when you don't have the answer and you keep trying.
Right, as opposed to somebody who just tells you, here's how you do it.
Right.
But if you didn't really learn why.
Exactly.
And some people could learn why from a mentor, but a lot of people would need to learn why from trial and error.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm careful about picking students, their motivations for learning magic.
Right.
Because I brought up previously, I want to work with students who are disciplined enough to really put in the time and practice. And I'm very fortunate that my students do take magic seriously and want to get better at it. They don't want to just have it as a hobby because, again, I'm charging money for this, so I want to make sure that they're getting value for what they pay.
Sure.
And if they could have just as easily gotten this on YouTube for free, I wouldn't feel good about providing them the service at the cost because they could have just gotten this for free,
right?
And it would have been the same outcome. So I'm always careful about picking people for that exact reason, to make sure that I can provide value and give them something that they couldn't get it anywhere else.
Okay. And that's in chatting with them beforehand. Like when someone reaches out to you and is interested in magic lessons, then you sort of have a conversation about, is it clear that they would not be a good fit for just going on YouTube and learning a couple of things or what they hope to do with it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, actually, lovely segue. If somebody wants to reach out to you, and they're curious about maybe some magic lessons or something, your Instagram handle is Timothy Loves Magic. And for anyone who's watching this, we've got on the screen there, but if you're listening in, Timothy Loves Magic on Instagram. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out here. And I'm sure some of the books just got absorbed just by, by you sitting here. That works. That's all I do. Like I just hang out in here and I hope that some of the stuff just falls out of the pages and into my brain, you know? But thank you also to our friend listening. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast of the Impossible. For behind the scenes access to the Museum of the Impossible project, as well as info about my public shows and private events, social media, and more, you can head on over to peterwood.com. I'm Peter Wood. Thanks.